Well, how does your head of hair play into your sense of self? If you ask any barber or hairdresser, someone's hair can dramatically change the way they look and how they think about themselves. And so, when someone experiences hair loss, for whatever reason, it can be an emotionally difficult pill to swallow. Now, there are many celebrities who are embracing the bald. Think Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Vin Diesel, Jason Statham, and that's just actors in the Fast and the Furious franchise. But there are also a lot of people who are not comfortable letting go of their thinning hair, and they're looking for cosmetic procedures or wigs to help them feel more comfortable. And so today on Blue Sky, it is hairline. We'll hear from a hairdresser and a barber who are facing these decisions with clients every day. We're going to hear from a woman who runs a wig shop in our province that caters to people who have lost their hair due to cancer treatment. And then we'll also hear from a Saskatoon doctor who is really passionate about helping people get their hair once again through transplants. And we want to hear your stories. How important is hair to you? How does it play into your into your sense of identity or your self-esteem? If you've experienced hair loss, what was that like for you? Our first guest knows all about hair. In fact, he is at the barbershop right now as we speak. Johnny Christie is a barber at Culture Grooming Lounge in Regina. And full disclosure, he is actually my barber, and I refuse to go to anyone else. How are you, Johnny?
Perfect. Good. I'm just beating the heat. I'm hiding in our basement at the shop right now.
Smart man. Yeah, it's pretty hot in the studio here too.
Yeah.
Johnny, why did you get into the business of hair?
You know what? It's a very personal thing. I like talking to people, and this way I can be one-on-one with someone, and I'm in their personal space. The conversations you and I have had sitting in the barber chair, they're quite personal things, and it's nice to make that connection with people. Plus, the confidence you give someone when you give them a nice haircut, it's great to see the smile on their face.
Yeah, can you tell me a story about that? You know, just on how hair means so much to people and how you can build that confidence with them?
Yeah. Let me think here. Well, you know what? We've all lived through a pretty awful period in our lives just recently. COVID, the shutdown, the lockdown was absolutely awful to people. A lot of people grew their hair out and kind of lost their sense of self. I had a gentleman come into my chair pretty much when I first started getting into hair. And I became a barber right. I finished school right when the world shut down. So I learned cutting hair, coming to the shop here right when we were all coming back to the normal flow of things, if you will. I had a gentleman come into my chair who hadn't had his hair cut. He had been shut in, was pretty nervous, pretty scared. He had actually had gone on some leave because it was a lot. There was a lot of stress around that time. He had a job interview. He was going back to, I think, either going to work or coming for a job interview. Cleaned him up, and he had hair down to his shoulder, gave him a nice-looking haircut, easy to look after. The smile upon his face, he was over the moon.
Well,
Things like that is what makes it for me.
yeah, and Johnny, I mean, I can use myself as an example here, right? I used to have thick curly hair, and then over the pandemic, I noticed, I'm starting to lose it a bit. And, you and I have had that conversations, and, I did feel a bit embarrassed. I debated, should I just shave it off? But, you found ways to, work with my hair, personally and built up some confidence there. Just how do you approach that process when somebody like me, maybe thinning but doesn't quite want to shave it? Like, what do you do?
There's lots of things you can do with someone whose hair is thinning. First of all, it comes down to face shape. You look at the person's face and talk about really what they want their hair to do. Now, of course, I'm not a magician. I can't put hair back onto your head, but we can create the look that there is more hair on your head. If you look at, you were talking about some actors earlier who've just gone completely bald, but if you look at people like Jude Law, if you look at Ryan Reynolds, if you look at some of these other guys, what they tend to do is they leave a lot of hair on top, whatever hair that is there, and then they go quite short on the sides. This creates the look that there is more hair on top. Simple things like that can change people's perspective on hair completely. The way you style hair, the products you put into your hair. Typically, for Caucasian males, it's best to stay away from shiny pomade products because our hair is quite fine. If you use more of a matte product, it gives your hair more volume, creates the illusion that it's actually a lot thicker than it is. Things like that, very simple, that, you wouldn't know unless you come to a barbershop and get your hair cut.
Good stuff. Johnny, thanks so much for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, man.
Johnny Christie is a barber at Culture Grooming Lounge. Well, our next guest also knows hair and just how it affects people very, very well. Jennifer Dubois is the owner of Mayosawin Salon in Regina, and Jennifer's on the line now. Good afternoon, Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So I understand you deal with a lot of Indigenous clients. What role does hair play for folks' sense of identity at your salon?
Sorry, I'm on my cell, so it's
That's okay.
chiming in here.
Okay.
So we have, in our Indigenous culture, it's all about the connection to Mother Earth and the strength. We get a lot of strength from our hair. There's a lot of significance to when you braid your hair, to when you cut your hair, to what you do with your hair after you cut it. So, there's just that deeper connection that we have with everything revolved around hair, even how you take care of it. So, it's very significant. And, when somebody's losing their hair, it can be very traumatizing to a lot as well. So I think they confide a lot in their stylist to, make the best decision for any type of hair loss situations.
Well, yeah, Jennifer, there's obviously much more deeper meaning there, too, and significance. Just how do you approach someone like that who is struggling with maybe their hair loss?
We'll just provide them with options. Sometimes, it's something that could be as simple as maybe they're low on iron. So that's something that I always talk about with my clients. If I notice that they're thinning, I might, ask them, have you been losing a lot of hair lately? Is it a regular thing? So just going through the consultation with them to make them feel comfortable so that they open up and we can kind of come to resolution to help them on their path of bringing the hair back, or, maybe it's alopecia and they have spots that are missing. That can be caused from stress. So really trying to figure out where the hair loss is coming from. And if it's hereditary, then there's other options like SMP, which is scalp micropigmentation. So, instead of going straight to getting hair transplant, there is that option as well. So,
Jennifer, do you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Because you just recently added that last year, right?
Yes, we did. It's a new service that I've been doing, scalp micropigmentation, and it is it's basically a tattoo of the scalp, but it's not a permanent tattoo. You don't go deep like a tattoo on the body. It lasts about 4 to 5 years on average, which I really like because it's not a permanent thing. And how fashions change, and somebody might like something in the first couple of years and might not want it later on down the road. So it has that flexibility. And it's painless, so that's a lot of questions that people have. Does it hurt because you're tattooing the scalp? Well, you don't go deep enough into the dermis layer to actually cause any pain, so it is not painful at all. It's an amazing service. I've had a lot of female clients too who come and get the service, who are just comes in the line of the family. It's hereditary and there's nothing they can do about it. They've tried everything. So recommending something like SMP can be very beneficial for a lot of females for the density of their hair. And it just changes the confidence in a person in an instant. Like it's amazing. And I absolutely love doing this service.
Can you tell me about that change in the confidence that you see firsthand?
They struggle with hair loss for so long, and they feel self-confident about going out or self-conscious about what others think or see, because when they look in the mirror, all they can see is the shininess of their scalp. And it's very difficult for somebody who's tried everything. So when we do the SMP on them and it actually looks like their hair is fuller, you just, you exert this level of confidence that, you're not trying to hide it anymore. It's pretty amazing. I had a client recently that I do see around in the community, and just seeing the way that she presents herself in public now is phenomenal. Like I just love it.
Oh, it's so great to hear. Well, Jennifer, just like Johnny said, you obviously, take things on a client by client basis. You do whatever you can to help them. Well, when do you ultimately make a decision or, say, maybe shaving your head's the best option?
That I leave that up to the client. I give them that as an option. So for a gentleman who wears their hair short, it might take a few appointments to really, not really convince them, but to talk to them about the difference it would have for them if they were to shave their head and do the SMP. You don't always have to shave the head. You can just create some density in the hair that they do have. But if it's somebody who's super fine on top, then it's really a matter of just giving them the time and the information that they need to make that decision on their own.
I've become more comfortable talking about it just recently, in fact, and doing it right now on the radio. But how do you find, I'm thinking men specifically, when it comes to being comfortable actually talking about this and kind of addressing it?
It's a very difficult topic. I was actually talking to my husband last night about it, and he shared some information with me that he's never shared before, just being self-conscious about his hair thinning over the years. He has a long braid that he wears, and, as an Indigenous man, he's envisioned growing old with gray hair and long braids. and he's come to realization now in his 40s that that's not going to be possible for him. So it's a hard pill for him to swallow. But, just having that trust in somebody like your stylist, we have signs up all around so people can kind of, do their own research. And, just mentioning something simple and behind the chair to start the conversation, I think really helps that individual. And it's not that I'm pushing them to open up right then and there, but, just kind of planting that seed so that they can, come back at a later time when they're comfortable to really start talking about it. And I think that's all we can do, having these type of conversations on the radio, I think is very helpful for a lot of men who are self-conscious about it and don't really want to talk about it. Well, we want to give you that information. So start researching it and see if it's something for you. And you'll be amazed at the confidence level you'll have after.
Well, Jennifer, it's been a great conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Jennifer Dubois is the owner of Meyosoin Salon in Regina. Well, at 14 years old, Carleen Crone lost all of her hair. She has alopecia universalis. She's lived with the condition for 35 years. And for more on her story, Carleen joins us on the line. Good afternoon, Carleen.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, I think a lot of people have heard of it. I certainly have. But what exactly is alopecia?
I guess in a nutshell, it's your immune system attacks your hair follicle and your hair falls out. But after a time, some people it's more permanent, like myself. And yeah, basically your immune system attacking your hair follicle.
So, Carleen, just how did it present itself in your life? What happened?
I guess it started, like I said, when I was 14, and I discovered a small dime-shaped spot and with like no hair, and it kind of progressed from there. There would be like the spots would get bigger, and then some of it might regrow back a bit, and then it would fall out somewhere else. And so I kind of went through, had gone to a dermatologist and had tried different things. And the first kind of course of action was to do cortisone injections in the sites where it was falling out. And so I did that for a while. And so it kind of completely fell out from the time I was 14. But then by the time I was 18, I had probably like 95% of my hair back.
Okay.
And then it was probably over the next 7 or 8 years that, I was able to kind of grow long hair, but then it was like started falling out again. And up like after that time, I've been pretty much completely bald after that, and it didn't regrow.
Carlene, what was that like at 14 years old?
Well, it was pretty devastating. It's not a good time in especially a girl's life or I suppose anybody's life to have that happen. And, but I think I felt like it was something I could overcome. Like it was something I would get through, we'd get through this and then I'd go to the doctor and it would get fixed and it would all come back. And I mean, to a certain extent it did. But it was probably more devastating for me when, the second round where, I'd had the majority of my hair for, maybe 7-8 years. And then it just slowly started falling out again. That was actually probably more, mentally impactful to me and detrimental in that way. Like I really, struggled with depression at that point.
Yeah, did you mind telling me more just about the mental impact and how you, kind of came to terms with that?
For sure. Like, so, like at that point when, it started falling out and it was, looking very much like it wasn't going away. And this was, most likely going to be a lifelong, struggle for me or burden for me. I decided I would go to counseling, and it was probably the best thing I ever did because it was a lot of, challenging how I thought about things and how I felt about myself because, a lot of times it was, me being in a public place and, I'd gotten to the point where, I was wearing hats kind of cover up what I had left. I didn't want to like shave my head bald because I just didn't want to get rid of what I had. And so I was struggling with that. And, thoughts like, oh, that person must be looking at me and thinking I'm ugly, or like, why is she wearing a hat? Or, really kind of, things that played through scripts that played through my head over and over and made me, really miserable and upset. And after I went to counseling, it was, really challenging how I thought about myself and, what it was worth to me to beat myself up about the things that I didn't even know people probably weren't even thinking that. And it was just, me in my own head. So that was a real pivotal point for me. And I think my positivity and my ability to cope with it, like that was kind of the foundation for me. And then, after that, it's, I have my moments yet. It's been a long time that I've had this, like, we're going on 35 years and I have my moments where I don't think twice about it, but then other moments, that's probably 95% of the time, but the other 5%, it's, I really wish I had hair. I wish I didn't have this issue. And I just allow myself to kind of, have my moment of feeling the loss of it. And then I move on, but it's, I have to say, like, when you reached out to me to, have this interview, like even this morning, I feel quite emotional about it.
Yeah.
In a sense that, I do feel alone a lot in my struggle is that I don't know a lot of people that have it. And I know it's not life threatening. It's not, anything I can't live with and I can't be happy with most of the time. But, that, it's acknowledged that, it is a struggle sometimes and, mentally and, there is depression sometimes that comes with it. So, yeah, I really appreciate you reaching out to, to have a discussion about it for sure.
Well, and Carlene, I really appreciate you doing it today, especially if you're having those feelings, those emotional feelings this morning. And it just made me wonder, it's like, and this is easier said than done because I have my own issues with my own hair loss, not the same condition as yours. But, why do we care so much and should we care so much?
Well, I mean, it's a strong issue, a strong question, and it's, how we look, is kind of sometimes we feel like represents who we are. And, for myself, I don't want, I really don't want to be represented, to be bald. I'd rather be a person that has, a lovely ponytail or, a luscious long hair. But, it's, I think, how we all deal and struggle with who we want to be and then who we really are and reconciling those two things and being okay with it, right? And allowing ourselves not to be okay sometimes with it because it's okay to not feel the loss of it, right? Or to feel the loss of it. So,
well, Carlene, on a maybe more positive note, what role do wigs play in your life?
Oh, well, I love wigs. That was kind of, as I progressed through my life as a bald woman, I had really embraced it after I kind of went to that counseling, and I just wore hats usually. I had an early experience with a wig when I was 14, and I wasn't happy with it at all. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to do that again. And so then I wore hats for a long time. I even made some of my own hats. I was always on the lookout for hats. And it just got to the kind of the point where, sometimes I didn't want to stick out. I didn't, you want to blend in sometimes. And also I would feel like a lot of people worried for me when they saw me and didn't know me that I was going through cancer treatment. So there was always that look on people's face that, I didn't want them to be worried and, to look at me that way. And I really just wanted to blend in. So at that point, I decided I would see what wigs were like again when my children were probably like 2 and 5 at that time, and I was just like, okay, it's time to. I want to look and see what there is, and I was amazed, and from that point on, I wore wigs. It was I went in feeling like a completely different person, and it made me not that the way I was bad before, but I felt fabulous. I felt beautiful. I felt it really uplifts me, and I blend in. People can't. Hardly anybody, I don't think I've met anybody who knew I was wearing a wig unless, you wear a wig yourself and maybe you can pick it out. But I always felt like, nobody could tell, and I always got wonderful compliments on my hair. So yeah, I've had many, many different wigs and many different styles and many different colors. And always everywhere I've gone, the staff has always been wonderful for help. Like, you can try different things on and see, what suits you and what doesn't. It's been really positive for my self-esteem and how I feel when I go out in public.
Well, and Carlene, your story has been very positive for our show today. Thank you so much for sharing it, and take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Just following up with our conversation with Carlene Crone, as we know and as we just heard, it's of course not just fashion that drives people to buy a wig. Carrie Bishop knows this well. Carrie is the owner of Pink Tree, the fitting shop in Saskatoon, and Carrie's on the line now. Good afternoon, Carrie.
Good afternoon.
Carrie, just any
Thanks
thoughts?
for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. Just any thoughts on what you heard from Carlene about wigs?
Well, Carlene was a good example of how it can be very devastating to lose your hair, but later you can turn it into kind of a positive, fun thing. And I think that's where we see people transition. Once they get used to wigs, they can pick all different styles and have a little bit of fun with it. So we see people walk in a little upset and often walk out feeling just like themselves or even better. So wigs can be a very positive thing.
Carrie, can you walk me through that process? Because that can't be easy. Yeah, someone coming in who, like you said, could be very upset or just not even know what they're doing there or what they're going to, how they're going to end up leaving.
Yeah, exactly. Well, first they come in and they're just wanting to know a lot about them. So we come in and we discuss kind of why they've lost their hair and what their goals are, and if they want their hair to look like their original hair. Often it's helpful to bring in pictures of what they used to have their hair look like. Some people want to go completely different, though. If they were dark, they may want to be blonde. So it is a chance also to switch it up. So after we do that little consultation, we measure their heads and pick sizing and colors, and then actually we have a pretty good selection. They can actually try them on. And I think that's the most important part, is when you can actually see yourself in them, and that's sort of when the magic happens and they get pretty excited. So, and especially they know when they find that correct wig, right away they feel like themselves.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask you about, just that idea of the correct wig. Obviously, it sounds like you have a good variety of different people.
We do.
I was curious, just, do people typically look for what they used to have, or they, it's a chance to do something new, like you said, maybe have the hair that they've always wanted?
Yeah, I'd say it can go either way. A lot of people start wanting what they had, but to be honest, they walk out maybe with something even better. So that's kind of exciting for them, like they had a fresh trip to the salon. So, and I agree with what Carlene said. It's when they walk out, people often want wigs just to blend in. People don't want to know they have a hair loss disease or they're going through chemo or these other reasons. They just want to blend in like everybody else is usually what they're feeling.
We heard Carlene's situation. Carrie, who else comes in for like what other things are people going through in life that bring you to your store?
Yeah, we've got, well, the alopecia, of course. There is some people who go through certain illnesses like thyroid diseases or even side effects of medications. That will be a short-term or long-term hair loss there. We have people going through chemotherapy that just want a wig for that period of time in their lives, which is really common. And even just simply the elderly people, in particular ladies that don't have the strength or energy to do their hair anymore, or they have arthritis, but they still want to look a certain way, they do like wigs just for simple ease of, managing the hair.
Can you tell me more about that? Because we might not often think of seniors. I know my grandma, though, she hated it when she couldn't do her hair, right? And that was the one
Yeah.
thing that she would consistently do whenever she could was get her hair done. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Like we do have, for example, several ladies that are in different complexes where they go to dinner and they get dressed up for dinner, daily. And just to pop a wig on for 5 seconds compared to trying to curl or use curling irons or getting perms is really simple for them. And it really boosts their self-esteem. They feel good. They look good. I think thinning hair is super common in the elderly population, and wigs can really help with that.
Carrie, well, what's popular these days? What are we seeing in terms of these wigs? Are they human hair? Are they synthetic? What are we seeing?
We do synthetic and human. To be very honest, we sell a lot more synthetic. Synthetic has come a long way. It's really good quality. It's easier to actually handle than human hair. It lasts longer, and it's half the price, which helps. So that can get you, in a wig a little bit cheaper and have more options, especially if you have a couple wigs.
Yeah, I don't know anything about wigs. I mean, a little bit, I guess, but I've always envisioned that they probably aren't cheap. What can you tell me just about the cost and if there is, any kind of coverage for people who are losing their hair for medical conditions?
Right, for sure. Well, synthetic wigs in our shop run like around $350 to $550. Once you get into the real hair, human hair, you can get over that $1,000 mark, sometimes up to $2,000. So a lot of private insurance, if you have a medical reason for losing hair, will cover some portion of the wig. So it is worth looking into. A lot of people don't know they could have that coverage.
Carrie, why did you get into this business?
Oh, well, just to help people and help people feel better. Just make a difference. There's not a lot of businesses out there that you can make that type of difference on people, and this is one of them. They come in feeling one way and walk out feeling better, and I think that's the main reason I got in, for all the reasons that all the products we do a lot of that type of stuff. So,
Carrie, doing that work, does it affect your own relationship with your own hair?
Yeah, I appreciate it every day. I do have a full head of hair, but boy, I definitely do not take it for granted anymore.
Well,
that's for sure.
Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Carrie Bishop is the owner of Pink Tree, the fitting shop in Saskatoon. Well, Dr. John Michael Stevens is a family physician who has spent several years working on and off in northern Saskatchewan. He's also a hair restoration physician who started a new company in Saskatoon called the Medical Collective. And for more on that work, Dr. Stevens joins us on the line now. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Well, it's great to talk to you again, Dr. Stevens, because it's really fascinating, your just whole journey. Can you tell me, again, just, what made you get into hair restoration?
Yeah, absolutely. Good talking to you again, too, as well. So there were a number of factors that played into it. The primary factor for me looking into it was just that in the north, as I'd mentioned on a previous CBC show, we have a lot of hands-on experience and hands-on exposure to technical procedural things, and I really, really enjoy that aspect of my work up north. And having a fairly large family, a wife and 4 kids down in Saskatoon, who I'm away for 2 weeks out of every 4, it was sort of motivating to see if there was some way I could work towards getting back down to Saskatoon a little more and be home with family. An opportunity came up to look into some extra training in hair restoration, hair loss, and hair transplant surgery. And so I jumped on that, got all the training done. It was far more of an interesting journey than I anticipated, and ended up working in a clinic in Saskatoon for a couple of years doing hair transplant surgeries and hair restoration medicine, and then over the last couple of years branched away and have started, as you mentioned, our clinic, the Medical Collective in Saskatoon. We opened just last November.
Doctor, what did you learn about as you were going through that journey? Like, how much did you know about hair restoration before that, just as a regular family physician?
Yeah, very limited, to be honest, and that'll vary from physician to physician. Some family physicians may have had quite a bit of exposure to it, depending on the demographics of their patient population, and I hadn't had a lot, actually, to be honest. And so I went in thinking that, well, it's hair loss, it's a fairly localized organ, it's a fairly localized and limited set of medical conditions that can cause this. So how hard can it be? And then really, once you start doing the training and learning more and more about the depths of all the different conditions that can cause hair loss, and the psychological components, which I think was the most striking part of it, the psychological impacts of hair loss on people, it just got deeper and deeper and deeper and more interesting. And then to add to that, hair loss has, in a number of cases for me, not been the ultimate diagnosis, but actually has been the first sign or the first thing that triggered somebody to seek medical attention that's led to a diagnosis of other conditions, whether it's dermatological or endocrine conditions even. There are some pretty serious conditions that have been diagnosed, and the initial presentation was, my hair is getting thinner. Can you have a look?
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. So I had a patient who actually ended up being diagnosed with a blood cancer that I won't delve too deeply into, but
that's fine.
The initial presentation was hair loss, and just through the standard set of blood work that I was looking into, it was identified that there were some abnormalities that didn't quite fit. Did a little bit more digging, and eventually got her off to the right specialists and got everything dealt with. And I didn't actually have a lot of follow-up, so I don't know how things had progressed from there. I hope very well. But usually if it is identified as hair loss as the first presenting complaint, at least it's probably early in the process. So that bodes well. But it can be the first sign of many different conditions.
All right, folks, if you're just tuning in, our guest right now is Dr. John Michael Stevens in Saskatoon, who is a hair restoration physician and owner of the Medical Collective in the Bridge City. Al is also in Saskatoon. Go ahead, Al.
Good afternoon. Could you please tell me, is it true that if you pull a hair out by its roots enough times, eventually it'll start to grow back thinner? And then if you keep pulling it out, eventually it won't come back at all because it's dead. I was told that. Is that true?
So that's a great question, and the answer is probably not going to answer your question perfectly, but the answer is yes and no. I mean, just the pulling it out repeatedly doesn't necessarily mean that follicle will die or that will grow back thinner and thinner over time, but there is a condition called traction alopecia, and which can ultimately lead to follicles dying off. So that's often seen in people who have very tight hairstyles, so tight ponytails, ballet dancers, some African American hairstyles where they're often tied back quite tightly or braided very tightly, or headwear that's very tight and puts a lot of strain on the follicles. Anything that's pulling on those follicles can damage the follicle and ultimately lead it to not grow back. If you took one individual follicle and repeatedly pulled it out over and over again, it would probably be the inflammation that would eventually start to damage it, and so that hair probably would start to grow thinner and thinner over time and eventually may not grow back. But it's not an exact science in that respect. It would be different from person to person, and a person's genetics would also play into that, whether they're prone to hair loss, prone to male or female pattern balding, and so many different factors play in. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, and also if a person just got tired of shaving, you're just sick of shaving, is it possible for a man to go in and have his beard, sideburns, and mustache removed by laser, or is that against the, or would nobody do that for you?
Yeah, that's another good question, and it's actually probably more common of a thought in people's minds than they actually verbalize. So I appreciate you bringing that up. It is possible to do that. I think the risk with that is of scarring, and the other thing is patchiness. So when you have laser hair removal, there's never 100% removal, partially because hairs grow in cycles, and so some hairs might be in the part of the growth phase where that laser hair treatment will actually remove those hairs and kill those follicles. But there will be other ones that are dormant at that moment and that they will grow in later. And so what will happen is you'll end up with very patchy hair growth for quite a long time, and you would need a number of treatments. So a more definitive treatment option would probably be electrolysis, where they actually put a very, very thin filament, a metal filament or electrode into the follicle down to the base, and they use electricity to essentially burn or kill that follicle. It's a very long, time-consuming and can be very painful process, but it would be the more definitive option. Now, with that being said, I think people overlook the fact that when you shave, you still have a bit of that shadow on your face from the underlying follicles that are just at the surface of the skin. And there's a big difference between that and fully removing the follicles. And one might regret the decision to completely remove all the hair from their face, not realizing that it'll leave them looking drastically different than they expected. So something to keep in mind.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. I have no intention of growing it because I look pathetic in the beard and I'm sick of shaving. That's too. Is it really expensive to do electrolysis?
That's a good question, and I don't know because I don't do that. I know there are a number of people in Saskatoon and other places in Saskatchewan who are certified in electrolysis. So it would be worth probably contacting one of them and just finding out directly, because I would hate to speculate and then be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Al, thanks so much for your call. We got to move things along, and Dr. Stevens, just hang tight because
sure.
Obviously you provide the side from the hair restoration medical side of it, and I mean, to Al's point, we want to hear from people who have undergone this. And our next guest actually got a hair transplant in Saskatoon. He's talking about it because he wants to help get rid of the stigma around cosmetic hair transplant surgery. That guest is Craig Bear, and he joins us now. Good afternoon, Craig.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Craig, just tell us about your relationship with hair and how it changed over the years.
Yeah, I kind of grew up, with just a regular person with a full head of hair, and it was probably in my early 20s I started to notice it was starting to recede quite a little bit further back than I'd like, and it was kind of, thanks to, my genetics, and my grandparents both had, grandfather both had really, far back receding hairline, and it was just, like I said, I noticed it had been getting worse and worse, kind of in my early to mid 20s, and I had been doing lots of research on my own, just kind of checking different procedures and, not only locally but globally, with different people and seeing where they got it done. And then, as luck had it, I came across Dr. Stevens, and everything kind of changed after that. So.
Craig, first, before we get to how everything changed, you said you were doing research, so obviously you cared about it. Was that always the case? Like, did you immediately say, like, oh, I'd really like to do something about this, or did it slowly kind of get worse and worse?
It was like, as it was getting worse, my research kind of amped up quite a bit. So, noticing, people going overseas to get different procedures done, and then, researching the different procedures, whether it be, the FUE, the ones that I had done were like the long strip surgical procedures. So, I mean, there's lots of different options on that. But like I said, it was, thankfully, I didn't have to go far. I just had to go downtown to get that, or onto 8th Street, to get that done. So,
how did that affect your sense of identity both before and after?
Yeah, I mean, it was always something I was very self-conscious of. Like, I know, a guy, with either balding or receding hairline is, you always pay attention to the weather, which a lot of people don't really think about. It's like if you look at if how much is the wind blowing today? Do I need to wear a hat? Is it an extra a little bit of hairspray day today? Or is it raining? Or even if you're going to go for a swim, you're kind of like the guy who always has his chin above the water, never really quite goes underneath because you don't want to wreck the hairstyle either. So. But it's definitely a factor, right? I mean, it's our first impression of people is what we see of people, right? So it's always, you see the outward appearance and you kind of make that quick snap judgment of, who or what they're all about. And yeah, with the receding hairline, I know that definitely affect how I thought people viewed me as a first impression. So
I can relate to you, even just being on the radio, having a hot day like today made me a little concerned about my hair.
Yeah, it's like to start to sweat, and then and then it starts to wreck all the effort you put into it earlier in the day. And,
Craig, Craig, you talked a little bit about obviously the change. Just what was the procedure like? What about the expense? Like, what was that whole thing like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the procedure itself was incredible. Like, I mean, besides kind of the initial little bit of pinch of some freezing, the procedure was painless, and it was, Dr. Stevens has a great setup where it's like, you're laid back in a comfortable chair, you got like drinks there if you want, like just, have a little shot, like some waters, and I brought my guilty pleasure of some Diet Pop along with me, and we watched TV, and, it was good chit chat. I mean, Dr. Stevens is a great conversationalist as well, so we chatted about everything under the sun. But yeah, like it was phenomenal. Like the whole process was great. The next day, of course, you always have a little, I had a little bit of a headache just because, I mean, you did go under a fairly intense procedure, but, and even as far as healing goes, everyone is a little bit different in how they heal, but I healed up quite quickly. Within even a couple of days, I was already back to work and like as if nothing really happened kind of deal. So.
And how did that feel when you went back to work?
It was an interesting experience too, just because, on one hand you feel very obvious because I shaved my head and, you want to protect the area. So if you are wearing a hat, it's very loose fitting, it's not touching the recipient area. And so you kind of felt a little bit awkward because you're wondering if people are like, what the heck is going on with this guy, right? But at the same time, it felt good because I knew what path I was on, where I was going, and what the ultimate outcome was going to be. And I couldn't have been more excited for it. So,
Dr. Stevens, what's it like to hear from Craig about all this?
It's really great. Hey, Craig. Thanks for coming on. It's really great to hear about his experience. Now, Craig and I have been in touch on and off because my patients, once they're my patients, they're always my patients. And so I try to stay in contact with them. Craig also, it's interesting because he speaks to being self-conscious, and my impression of Craig when I first met him and every encounter since is that he's very self-confident and, a really outgoing and great guy. But that just speaks to what people may be experiencing, behind the scenes. And even if they're not displaying that outwardly, people often are suffering. But I'm glad to hear the procedure was as pleasant as Craig says it was. We do hear that often from many of our patients that it is relatively comfortable, and although it can be a long day, it's relatively pleasant, and it's not restricting. You're not tied down to a chair or anything like that. And we strive to make every procedure as comfortable as possible for our patients. That's the main goal. I mean, the main goal is to get a great result with a comfortable process.
Craig, any thoughts for people who might, be living through the exact same experience as you right now and not sure what to do? Yeah, if anything else, like go talk to Dr. Stevens just to see what he's able to do and what what kind of facility he has. I had been looking at the procedure I had done, a few years before, just because I knew that it was actually available overseas in other places. But I'm thankfully, I waited until it was at my doorstep, right? Because it's a lot more convenient, and there's follow up and what have you, right? So, but I mean, it's such a sensitive topic for a lot of men, whether it be balding or receding hairline. Mm-hmm. But it's just like, and there is such a simple fix for it. It's just where the technology exists there, where it's there is no there's relatively no scarring. It's, you heal quite quickly, and it looks, completely natural. And once everything's, grown in, it looks like, the receding hairline never took place. So.
Dr. Stevens only got about a minute and a half here, but the question I came in thinking right from the beginning, and I know you're in this business and you really obviously have helped Craig, but why do we care so much about hair, and should we care so much about hair is my big question today.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Why do we care so much about hair? I think that the main thing is that, as Craig alluded to, it's what people see. When we look at a face, we subconsciously see a hairline, and a hairline defines or frames the face, and that really tells us a lot about a person. It tells us about a person's sex, whether they're male or female, or it tends to help us determine that. It helps us determine age, race, even a lot. It just tells us a lot about a person, and that's just the hairline. And then there's the amount of hair and the style of hair. So it's a real defining piece of our identity, even if it's subconscious, right? And so when it starts changing, people start feeling like their identity is changing, or that it's not them, and that can be really tremendously effective to people in a negative way. Now, some people, they own it. Jason Statham, The Rock. Some people own it, right? They just shave their head and they're happy with it, and it flows with them. But that also depends on the shape of the face and the shape of the head, and maybe scalp scars or underlying things that hair could be masking that now it won't be. So it's just such a defining piece of who we are, much like, if you took away somebody's nose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Stevens, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to hear from everyone.
And Craig, thank you for sharing your story as well.
You're welcome. Thank you.